I've been in that position in many organizations where coming back into day-to-day work after we had a focus group, I felt like I had a scarlet letter on me. I felt like I had a target on my back, and that's not a good feeling. And I
Yes.
would have appreciated maybe more of acknowledging that, like any relationship, this is a relationship, a working relationship, and we will take necessary precautions to get through this versus uncomfortable things are shared. I can tell you don't like me particularly right now, but we're going back to just business as usual. That's not how relationships work.
Hey, we're in another episode of the Living Out Loud discussion series, and today we are talking about what happens when an organization does a needs assessment. I'm your host, Charmaine Utz, a relational DI expert, and we are unpacking real-life scenarios and issues that come up in professional settings or in spaces where we feel like we need to be buttoned up. The goal of every single episode is to reveal the layers and the nuances in our interactions with each other so that we can learn about them as a community that cares about diversity, equity, and inclusion. As always, the things that I say, share, my viewpoints in this episode, they are my own and not as representative of any of the agencies that I work for or am contracted by. Today, I have with me Jared Zachary in the space. I am super excited to have you here. I feel like I've been waiting to have you here. And just first, let me thank you for sharing space with me today.
Hello, Charmaine. I'm so happy to be here.
Oh, goodness. Yeah. So we met several years ago. I'm not even going to try to count. And I feel like when we worked at an organization together, we probably saw each other in passing. And then by fate, we're paired in a mentor mentee program. And from there, it just took off. I felt, you know what? If anyone were to be matched with me, I was so glad it was you. You are a special human being. You walk around with so much awareness and vulnerability, and you pick things up so quickly. I just I just feel lucky and blessed to have been paired with you that day and that our relationship continued and here we are and I can't wait to talk about stuff.
I'm super excited. I think about that day a lot. And at first I was like, yeah, because at first I remember being like, of course they paired the Black people together. But then later I was like, oh, this was like a match made in heaven. And so I'm really like appreciative of the journey that we've been on. So I'm happy to be here.
Yeah. I remember we took that picture. It's like a super old picture, but I still have it. It's up somewhere. And I don't know. I don't even take a lot of pictures like that. But oh my gosh, we did something cool and we are impacting each other's lives. I could be skeptical about a lot of things. So I thought, okay, a mentor program, let me volunteer. Let's just see how it goes. You might have felt similarly, but it really felt like that was a success for me. It was really different and it helped me open my mind. Not everything needs to be something you have to be skeptical of. And
Mhm.
it's been really cool to, like I said, watch our journey over the course of time.
I feel the same way.
Ugh, I love that. My heart. Jared, would you mind introducing yourself? Share whatever it is that you want to our listeners.
Hello, everyone. I'm Jared Zachary. I am an avocado lover, a coffee lover. I work in research. I'm a registered yoga teacher and a full-time Beyonce stan, and I'm happy to be here.
Okay. I first of all, I did not know about the yoga thing. This is new to me. And how cool is that?
Things I did quietly during the pandemic.
Right. That makes sense. I could totally see that in you. When you say researcher, could you share a little bit more about that, especially because today's lens is about like needs assessments?
Yeah, so I will say, so I work for an organization that does research and evaluation for other, I would say, public-facing organizations. I didn't know this was a job until I think the work that we did. But I feel like a lot of organizations want to get a third party to know what their data says, get an unbiased opinion about what their data is speaking to for contract reasons, have a third party to be able to validate what their data says. And so we help a lot of organizations know what their impact is. And so I do research through that way.
Hmm. Okay. And as you said that, I just realized too, I was like, I need to make a statement about myself. I feel like I have been involved in data and research and evaluation stuff for years. And I am still the person who the words in that space, I'm always like, I just use my own words sometimes or casual language. And then when I speak to someone who is way more involved in that industry, like you are, you're going to say terms and I'm going to know what they are, but I won't speak them the same way. It'll be like, yeah, when you all the people in the same room and you talk about things, like that's how I say stuff. So give me some grace there.
And I also think that's fair because I do feel like I mentioned, like I didn't know this was a job until I think our paths crossed, and I didn't think this was a job that I could get because maybe imposter syndrome, it seems outside of myself. I was like, there's words I don't know, there's tactics I don't know. And being in the field, I think it's a lot of things that we are intuitive to. And so I don't think,
Mm,
at that same time, I want to dispel that. I think research seems like this very high level thing that I think a lot of
mm,
us do in our every day to day life.
yes. I thank you for that. I think about yesterday, I was in a conversation with someone and I was describing all the things in the future and what I would like to do with data. And I was really describing what I imagined. And then she goes, oh, so correlation. I was like, girl, yeah, yes, that is it. But also all the things I said, okay? I don't want to lose all the things I said. So I'm actually glad that you started with that because I do feel like when people talk about data research, numbers, or even stories. And it just feels like a thing over here that people who have the brain for it can do. And if you don't have that brain, then it's something that you can't comprehend. And there's a lot of distance from it. So I actually appreciate what you just said. And I would really like to keep that something that we're grounded in when we talk. Thank you for that.
Of course.
Okay. I always like to start with a baseline of what we are talking about because people can think a lot of things. So I think it's a good place to start with what are needs assessments? What are the various types? Are there any common ones? Why are they common? And we'll just go from there.
Mhm. So I feel like needs assessments are pretty standard, but I think maybe people really don't understand what their use is, what they're for. But I feel like needs assessments is when you basically do a survey, an assessment in a very inquisitive sense, are trying to assess like where organization is at, what are its resources, what are its benefits, and maybe where are spaces for opportunity to get to the point that you really want to get to. It's a way to survey where you at point A and like what is needed to get to point B. So a lot of times it'll be an organization that wants to improve in X, Y, and Z. And we're talking to staff, talking to participants, surveying its inputs to see what are the strengths and like where are room for opportunity.
Mm, okay. And there's all kinds of different ways to do needs assessments. One I'm actually thinking about, of course, organizationally, but then people could do needs assessments in smaller senses and pockets of teams and stuff like that. But it could be helpful to talk about the various types of needs assessments because I know there's surveys and then there's also focus groups and then there's mixed methods. I don't know if you have anything to add to what I just said, but if there's a way to shine a light on the various ways that organizations do needs assessments and which ones are the ones that you find most common? Because I know there's some in my mind. But I'm curious about what you think.
Yeah. And so I will say, I think a needs assessment is a broad term, but I feel like there's different methods to get closer to what you want. I've seen organization needs assessments where a broader organization is just trying to see where they are at in the field. I think as you described, I think there's been teams where they're trying to evaluate what the skills are on their teams. For bigger organizations, I think I've seen surveys be used, which I think is a really easy, maybe lower risk way to get a feel of how folks are feeling about any given topic. I've seen
Mm,
focus groups and interviews used, and I think that is maybe more seen as labor intensive. And I think in the research world, qualitative data gets a bad rap compared to quantitative data. Interviews and focus groups where you're talking to folks one on one, where you're getting folks direct words about how they feel about something is a way more rich way to understand and experience or understand how folks are feeling about any given topic in an organization to then take that to come up with a game plan. And so
Yeah.
I do think a lot of research folks see surveys and quant as the gold standard, but I think a lot of organizations that are in like community research really appreciate focus groups and interviews because I think qualitative is where stories can back up numbers.
Mm-hmm. Yes. Yeah. It really paints a picture. And I think you used the word rich. You had also used another word earlier about low risk. That really sat with me. I feel like people love surveys. And I don't think there's anything wrong with a survey. I think surveys can help tell something. And then there's lots of other ways of knowing. Like you said, there's interviews and focus groups. We've even done like larger town halls, and we do it in such a way where there's also a way to share stuff anonymously or directly to facilitators and things like that. And I have just always found that there's too much learned and revealed in the qualitative spaces when they're open for people to share that you cannot, it just is not captured in regular quantitative surveys. And there's almost maybe like an expectation, and hopefully it's reducing. I feel like it's reducing. But people feel like just because there's a box on a survey, people can type in your feelings here. Not all things can be communicated by typing it into a box. It doesn't always happen that way. Some people need to say it out loud, and some people, and I cannot tell you how many times, as a result of having the space via focus groups or a town hall, because this is where multiple people are sharing, that is the space where people realize what they're thinking and feeling. They
Yes.
literally are seeing it and they're like, oh my gosh, I didn't know that was a thing. Okay, this is my whole thing. And it becomes more than an information gathering. It's also like facilitating a process and people's discovery and things that come up for people, because so much happens in those spaces and you cannot capture that in a survey.
No, exactly. And even I think you get a survey, you see the number of responses, you put in a chart, cool. But even in focus group interviews, I feel like I remember my first behavioral health class and it was, oh, all behavior is just needs communicated. And even I did a focus group a couple weeks ago, and the simple fact that people knew it was being recorded and numerous people said, I don't feel comfortable to answer the next question. That's data, even in what's communicated and what's not communicated is telling a story. And that was something we were able to bring back. Oh, a lot of your staff didn't feel comfortable to answer number 3, and we don't have an answer for that, but that is in
Yeah.
itself an answer that people didn't feel safe. And that's just so much that you don't get captured when people are clicking through a 12 question survey.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And if your brain doesn't work that way, because mine kind of struggles with that. Like, after a while, I'm like, I care that you have the information, but also I don't have it in me to do it this way. So I try to take surveys when I'm really able to sit down, but that's neither here nor there. I was thinking about the importance of mixed methods, and I feel like a lot of organizations are not sitting on a pile of money to spend on a lot of
Mhm.
things. So then decisions have to be made about how they gather information. Because the more spaces that are held, the more information you gather, the longer it takes to do something and analyze the data and then all the stuff after that. But I love a good combination of things. I still think a survey is cool, but if I were to let one go, I tend to see if that one could be let go first, because I know it won't capture everything that you can capture in either focus groups or larger town halls or even individual ones. My favorite are when you can do a combo of all of them. When we
Mhm.
have the focus groups or it's larger town halls and then there's space, people know if you all don't feel safe to do this here, then there's individual time you can schedule here so that you can share and it's not in front of everybody. That leaves more room to capture as much as possible. And I want to go back to that term low risk with the surveys. I think in addition to money, many leaders and organizations can worry about what will happen when you start to talk to their staff. And I think
Yes.
that's important information as well. So do you
Yes.
want to know, or do you want to just hear something specific? Like, I don't like that very much. And I try to normalize that fear. I get the initial fear. That's okay because humans are humans. It's, oh my gosh, what are we about to hear? You're gonna hear something. And if you are so afraid or whatever other feelings to the point where you would choose not to go beyond a regular quantitative survey because of your fear, that's different. That's very different. And I saw you were going to say something, so I'm going to stop talking. You talk now.
No, you just brought like a lot of thoughts. Because I think in the term needs assessment, we are trying to survey what the needs are. And I think a lot of folks, a lot of leaders, a lot of organizations go into a needs assessment hoping that their idea of what is the norm will be validated. And so when you do a needs assessment and then you realize that there is a different story or a different experience that you're not used to, people get really scared. And I think it's easier to mitigate that in a survey when it's 4 choices per question and maybe 1 question at the end that is a text box versus in interviews where people go on tangents and we have probing questions and it brings back a memory, and which is at the end of the day, if you love your organization, that's what you want to know, all the varying experiences so that a change can be made. But when those changes are brought up to you and it's maybe different than your perception of what's been happening, that's hard to sit with. And I just don't think a lot of folks, one, anticipate that being a part of the process and 2, are ready to hear that. And which makes
Yes.
sense. I think it's a human reaction to have a bodily reaction when your sense of reality doesn't meet others, especially when it's more positive. But yeah, I think, just as you brought that up, it's like I've seen that be an obstacle with so many.
As you're talking about what you're talking about right now, I am remembering when you and I were preparing for what would this look like? What would our conversation today look like? And we were talking about the different phases of this process. And you're talking about some of it right now. And we thought it's 3 phases, if you will. It's what's at the beginning and the preparation and the excitement that people feel to do something different. That's real. I believe many organizations want to hear to do different, but don't understand what it all comes with very much. So that initial, I support it. I'm down. I'm excited. Let's create change together. And then there's like a middle part. A middle part is hearing the information and deciding whether or not to do something with it. And phase 3 for me is if you get past phase 2, then 3 is you can actually do something with it. But we had talked about phase 2 is a place where people get really stuck. I want to pause and actually ask you, is that how you conceptualize the phases? And what do you, well, no, let me just ask that. Let me ask that only.
Yes. I feel like, yes. I feel like phase 1, people either want to validate their findings, want to reassure that their idea of where they stand is true, or are very open to getting information, bringing in a contractor, like wanting to know what they don't know. And I think we call it a lot of times like discovery phase. I think that's like very exciting to a lot of organizations, a lot of people, even just like an individual person. I think we want to know more. A lot of times the process will be done, like research will be done, interviews, focus groups, whatever. And I think phase 2 is where folks get stuck a lot, where new information is brought to them. A lot of times it's not congruent with what our beliefs are. Phase 3 will be where maybe some recommendations are given and there's opportunity to create changes. And it seems like people get stuck like right before there. As you were talking, I feel like a term I used in college, I taught a lot of sexual health, and we would always talk about aftercare. And I feel like after phase 2, there needs to be some aftercare that a lot of folks maybe just aren't ready to do or don't know how to do. We heard some uncomfortable information. How do we sit through that? How do we sift through that? How do we get everyone on the same page again after we realize that we are all thinking about things differently? And I feel like that is really hard to do. And it's easy to, I think a lot of folks, the momentum stops there. task groups
Yeah.
dissipate, and then a couple of years later, everything starts again at phase one.
Right. Right. Okay, you said a couple things. And one is I love the idea of aftercare and I like the idea of is it a preventative? I can never say that word. And living unapologetically, we try so hard to prepare. But I feel like it doesn't quite there's not been enough ability to prepare what you will experience. It's almost like you said, it's a desire or an expectation to hear something that will validate or not expecting something too far away from the reality that leaders are experiencing. So there's that. But at least up front, it's also helpful to start building the capacity to hear hard things and not
Yes.
just discount it or whatever it is. To me, phase two is where leaders are faced with a lot of emotions, a lot. I have seen an absolute rejection of the information, like it's false. I have seen anger, defensiveness, confusion, guilt, sadness, and shame. I should have said shame and guilt. It just so many things that contribute to that stuck point that doesn't get people to that phase three. There's so much stuck there. And I find too that it's very helpful if whoever is doing the research has the skill set, like a clinical skill set too, to help through that. Because it's not, people aren't just dealing with reading information, they're dealing with what's happening inside of them. And this is what's contributing to the stuck point. You're so expressive. Just tell me what you're thinking because I want to know.
No, and that resonates. 'Cause I think even in the role I'm in now, I feel like I had a lot of imposter syndrome. I was like, I'm not good at quant. I don't, statistics, not my thing. But a leader at my job was like, okay, but you've worked in social services and you know what it's like when that is your identity. And a lot of times we are providing information that goes against how folks feel about their
Mm,
identity. And
hmm.
and that's a conversation you can't just throw someone who's never been in the trenches. She was like, a
Yes.
lot of our staff hasn't been on the street arguing with one of their youth about a bus pass or been working in a shelter and arguing with ladies about why they can't
Yes.
bring in soap. And so she's like,
Yes.
a lot of times especially I think it's hard because a lot of the needs assessments we do, which I think it's a shame that in this field, it's like more contractually a norm to be assessed. But like in helping field, I think we're doing education, social work, public health, and a lot of these helping fields where people really latch onto that as an identity. I am a social worker. I am a teacher. I am a public health worker. And that's a noble identity to have on that most of society accepts as just naturally good.
Mm,
And so when you provide information that still acknowledges all the good that is attached to that, but shows room for improvement, that hurts. When you're in the grocery store and you say, I'm a social worker, people are like, oh my gosh, like you were so strong, I couldn't do that. Like, when you say I'm a teacher, you were so strong, I couldn't do that. And so when you provide information that just challenges like what you thought about your identity, that is really hard to sit with.
mhm.
And in my work, I think we try to acknowledge that we a lot of times provide really hard information, but
Yeah.
because of how much you care about your field, you want it to be better, or how much you care about your organization, you want it to naturally improve, and trying to carry that humanity in with what are the next steps, which I think
Mhm.
sometimes can easily get lost, or it's natural to not feel that on the receiving side.
Yeah. Yes. You're almost making me wonder too, the way that information is shared. I haven't seen any real standard for how to do that part of the process because I was thinking about what it would be like to really prepare people for taking in the information beyond, hey, heads up, blah, blah, blah. But something very intentional to at least ground in the moment and reassurance and acknowledging of emotions and like knowing that there's space for it. But the intention to do that is so you can hear this and then move through it. because a lot of, I can't speak for everybody. I'm just speaking from my own personal experience. I'm just saying, because these are typically done not terribly clinically, it feels a lot of hard information is shared. It's abrupt, and there isn't very much support to struggle through it to do different. That's an onus on a contractor or service provider. And then there's a major onus on leaders who are going through the work. I'm hoping people are understanding this expectation of, you can have the most best intentions. You can be a wonderful human. I don't even know what else to say about that. I think there's a lot of well-intentioned, well-meaning people who want to do work. And those are also people who experience these things. And to have realistic expectations for self and leadership teams that you're not going to like it. I have not met any group of people who loved hearing things weren't going well.
Yeah.
Can that just be okay? Can we accept, I'm going to hear something I don't like?
Yes. Even as you said that, one of a plug, I do think more clinicians should go into research. Whoever's listening, y'all are needed. But as you said that, I had a glimpse where I'm like, I don't want to share. Me and my partner, we're in couples therapy. And I think the way that our therapists would ask us questions and prepare us emotionally that I might not hear something I like from my partner, and how scary that felt initially, but having someone with clinical background walk us through that process, and it became more regular and it became easier to hear. And at the end of the day, it felt like us united against a problem, not us against each other. That same process needs to be wrapped into needs assessments. And if you don't have that, even behavioral health background, but clinical background, that's not always intrinsic to the process.
Yeah. Yeah, it's not. I think, I don't want to veer too far from the topic, but I believe that is a thing in many DEI related types of work. It's not seen as clinical yet. It's not. It's like an administrative position. And that, I'm not saying people in administrative positions that don't have a clinical background aren't doing well. I'm just saying that there's a clinical aspect to the work that hasn't quite been embedded in a way that I think is needed. We are dealing with humans that are having these responses, and these humans, these leaders, are responsible for this change. There's so much struggle in all of these moments. So I don't want to get too far. It would be really interesting to do that. And people in organizations doing needs assessments, let's arrive at this place where there's realistic expectations. There's going to be a part of this journey that you're really excited about in discovery. There's going to be a part that's really not fun to hear, that people don't enjoy everything about the workplace. And then there is a chance for you to be engaged enough to change it so you don't keep that from happening. Because if leaders choose to abandon or leave and just don't even go to phase 3 and not trying to do anything, you really are choosing your own self. Like, you don't like how you feel, so you stop the process, and you actually now know what people are saying. Like, you just heard what people are saying. And sometimes the defense mechanism is to discount, deny the validity of the information. That's a whole other thing. It's a whole other thing. It's so fascinating to me how people can say, that's not what happened. And I'm like, pretty sure it happened. Yes. Have you had that? It sounds like you have.
Oh, yeah. Yes, many times. I think even, and I appreciate my organizations. I think we are trying to put in a lot of practices that I think challenge the way folks think about research, even which big organizations love to hear things that are gold standard, like rigorous research. That means a survey of 100+ people who answered this way and is statistically significant, blah, 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 whatever. And we know that is a specific method that was come up by specific people. And that's not, while it's valid, there are other ways to bring validity. When you bring other methods and it highlights different experiences, it's really easy to discount. I think folks really do not like qualitative data. And for some reason, that's really easy to discount. That was anecdotal.
Yeah.
That was one person's experience. Even if you talk to 10 people, across 10 different teams that have different experiences. I think even just depending on what you look like and how you are presenting data, as much as organizations are trying hard to make research more accessible and use terms that people are familiar with. I know sometimes as like a Black person myself, and I try to make sure that everyone's on the same level. I bring an air of comfort to make sure everyone understands what I'm saying, which I think is a strength. At the same time, if that's not something someone wants to hear, it's really easy to peg that as, oh, that wasn't real. And it seems like Jared's interpreting slang. And
Mm.
as much as people validate these different methods because it brings different perspectives, because it's different than the norms, when it's not what folks want to hear, it's really easy to peg almost like a downfall on those things.
Yeah. Yes. I think there's a lot of ways people can discount, invalidate very real things, especially if there's stake in it. If I can avoid doing something, I can see the problems. I can see them. I can see them. But I think that's what makes it hard to be in this particular industry. There were a couple of situations when we first started out living unapologetically. Couple of situations that went not well, but went not well because of people's responses to very real information. And I was feeling like, okay, first of all, this is activating for me. I've already been in a situation where people told me that what I said wasn't real. This is not cool at all. And then two is, oh my gosh, am I participating in this problem? I would remember being a staff member and someone would come in and there's a whole hoopla and nothing would happen. And then I started seeing, are we doing that thing? Are we coming into organizations trying to help them? And then they just disregard it. So I really started, it wasn't just me and a couple other people. We were thinking about how could we also interview organizations before we start working with them? Have they at least arrived at certain places? Have they acknowledged white supremacy culture is real and they all participate in it? If they're there, okay, we're a little further along than places who are still like, well, I don't know, we could maybe, or it's not as concrete for them. So we had developed something for us that we knew it would be a healthier relationship. Doesn't mean it would be easy. It was just healthier. But when you said that, I just started thinking about the various ways that people will distance from the information. And I think it's also helpful for us to talk about what else do we see in leaders or even staff in this place. It could either be phase 2, where they're struggling through it and deciding whether or not to do it, or phase 3, which is maybe start to do something and stop, or just choose not to do phase 3 at all.
Well, you really got a lot of good points. In my organization, we have a vetting process, and that sounds fancier than it is, but it's really not only logistically, but when we look at a client, are they at a point where we will be able to do the work that they're contracting us to? Especially, I think folks look at the website, look at the mission, know what we're about, but based off what we heard, does it seem like it will be a fruitful relationship for both of us? As in, yeah, are you in a space to maybe hear uncomfortable information? I think that's a thing we talk about a lot of times. Phase 2, especially that aftercare, and I think I've seen a lot of really difficult conversations happen well, is that, which I think maybe people really just don't expect with like needs assessment or research, is like that people aspect. A lot of time when we present data, it's not a one and done. It is an ongoing dialogue that maybe happens over the span of time of when you saw this, what were your initial reactions? What do you feel like this data is saying? And also different questions, what did it feel like it was saying? And what
Yeah.
might it actually be saying?
Yes.
Because, you might see something about participant satisfaction and it felt like, oh, I'm not good at my job. And that's maybe not even what it said. It might have just said that people need more support in X, Y, and Z. But we have developed like a set of questions to really talk through that process of that. The end of phase 2 is, one, remembering your organization's mission and why we started this in the first place. I think also an element of separating ego from data. That data is storytelling, and it's storytelling about your organization, about processes, about experiences.
Yeah.
And that doesn't necessarily mean it's attached to Jared, the case manager, or Jared, the researcher. Remembering
Mhm.
that after maybe sitting through a lot of those hard emotions and really digging into what is this data telling us, it's telling us that employees need to feel a greater sense of belonging, or like participants need to feel they have more resources. Then we can move to phase 3 of creating actionable change. And not only these overarching findings, but more, I used to work at a hospital where we had to do yearly needs assessments. We call improvement plans based off of the data. In 3 years, what is our improvement plan for this next cycle, and tangible steps? And I think that is really needed, because I think a lot of times change gets lost because of the uncomfortableness in phase 2. But creating like a tangible play by play of what the next phase will be, what are incremental changes that can happen, is imperative.
Mhm.
But because
Yeah.
of that emotionalness and because it's hard work, I don't think we always get there.
Yeah. I don't even think everybody gets to the place where they acknowledge it's hard work. I see that there's a lot of strategy and task stuff very much associated with it without the acknowledgement of individual the individualized personal experiences that are part of the strategic task work. And people really want to separate that, which is white supremacy culture thing. Like people want to,
Yes.
I don't like these feelings and I get through it so I can do the tasks. You actually have to bring that with you. The only way that's successful is if this is with you and this gets worked on too. So when you said that, I'm like, I'm pretty sure a lot of people don't do that because there's so much effort to just separate it because it's really hard and they want to just do a good job. And then I'm thinking about, I just think a lot about staff experiences in all of this stuff and what that emotional roller coaster is like, because it is one. And if they're not on an emotional roller coaster, that means because they've had enough and they just sitting outside till they're ready to go somewhere else. They're just not on it. I already know how that ride goes. I've been on it. No thanks. The roller coaster is these expressions of caring and we're going to do different. It seems like, okay, we're getting on the ride, everybody. And then there's this point where everybody can see, everybody knows what's happening in an organization when needs assessments occur, and it's the staff understand. They might not be in the rooms, but they know we've seen it. Okay. They know the information comes, and then there's this waiting period of what's happening from here. Now that the information has been shared, what's it going to look like? I know plenty of staff know that when information's shared, there's actually a lot of uncomfortability. They don't know what it's going to be like going into team meetings and supervisions, because as much as leaders want to not act different, they go into meetings and supervisions just a little extra sauciness. And it doesn't
Yes.
have to be, it's not always the data, but I even think it's important to know that there's stuff happening in your organization with your staff when this is happening. If you're having a bad day because of something personal, you want to just be aware that this is the climate right now for your team. If this is sauciness because of something else, just let people know there's something else going on. It's not that. And then be aware that people go into these things with sauciness because of the data. And that is what it is. And
Yes.
don't act like it isn't a normal human response. I can say,
Yes.
as someone that hears things and someone that like, I care very much about hearing stuff, but it's still really hard to hear it. I don't like hearing I didn't do a good job. I will hear it because I need to, but it doesn't feel good. It doesn't feel good.
It doesn't. And I think that's a part of the aftercare too. It's okay to acknowledge
Yes.
the feelings that come after that. I know, and
Yes.
especially as simple as you're a supervisor and you had a bad day, maybe we don't need to have this one-on-one, or we're sitting in like a cultural shift and someone was very outspoken. And I know I've been in that position in many organizations where coming back into day-to-day work after we had a focus group, I felt like I had a scarlet letter on me. I felt like I had a target on my back, and that's not a good feeling. And I
Yes.
would have appreciated maybe more of acknowledging that, like any relationship, this is a relationship, a working relationship, and we will take necessary precautions to get through this versus uncomfortable things are shared. I can tell you don't like me particularly right now, but we're going back to just business as usual. That's not how relationships work.
Yes. And again, that's why it's heart work, because it's people and it's relationships. And he said something in there, and I don't remember the exact words, but to me, what I was hearing is this invitation to, like, if you're having your own personal experience, that's fine as human, but take care of that. Don't just
Yes.
bring it with you. And then whatever that looks like, I do this because I usually say throw up on people. It feels like that, but you don't like it, and you want people to know you don't like it. And it's so harmful, damaging. It can be passive aggressive or aggressive. There's some direct comments that I've been made aware of. There have been situations I've had someone come in after a situation occurred. People shared things. We'll go into a meeting and be like, well, we're going to do this since I heard people don't like blah, blah, blah. And it's like, oh.
Yes.
And that's so common. It's so common. You would think, hey, don't do these things. But what'll happen is, I'm not in all the spaces, so I'm not saying that everybody does this, but I'm saying, y'all, I've been in enough spaces and I've been doing it long enough to know this be happening. Leaders will convene and be on the same page about how to do stuff, and we're going to do better. And then individual leaders go into spaces where no other leader can see, or no one was really going to hold them accountable. And then they go into spaces and they continue harm. And then that harm that continues is the very thing that staff are saying that there's no accountability for.
Yes.
And it's so difficult because staff are the ones that already said, hey, this is happening. Okay, we'll fix it. Leader go back in, it's still happening. Well, then where else am I supposed to go to say something? Because this leader just came up in here and basically said, hey, now that you said something, I'm going to have this attitude with you and we're going to do it different and do it begrudgingly. And that doesn't help any culture shift at all. And is indicative of, look, leaders, it'd be a struggle to do it. It's okay. It doesn't feel good. I think that leadership teams could do themselves justice and be supportive to allow space. Can we just vent and say we don't like it? Let's do this for the purpose of getting it out. And then we don't walk away after that. We stay here and figure out, what do we need to get from this place, because this actually matters. How can we support each other? How can we support staff? But don't dismiss that normal human response. You can acknowledge it, just do something with it and take care of it so you can take care of other people, the people that you're responsible for.
That just resonates a lot. I think, there is a human element that people just want to dismiss. And by dismissing it, it makes the process harder. I was on a project yesterday with a client that was very hard. And it meant a lot that a senior person to me was like, oh, here's a Word doc that we can vet out our hard feelings about why this project is difficult. And we can formulate that in a more professional way later about our evaluation. But knowing that's hard, we bring that into every meeting, and that's not going away. So how can we work with that? I just think that should be more normalized in working in difficult times, hearing hard information. So much of that people want to go unspoken, but by avoiding it, it is making things worse.
That is really cool, by the way. I like that.
I was shocked. I was like,
so I can just put some down. Okay. It's like, F this, blah, blah.
I felt very affirmed. I was like, wow, that meant a lot. Especially from which I think is half of the aspect too, that whether we talked about mentoring or stuff, it was like someone senior to role model. Oh, I've been having a hard time. I can only imagine what people in a less leadership position are feeling.
Yes.
I'm going to create this opportunity for people to vent about how they've been feeling about this project. That meant a lot to me as someone that was junior to her. And so I think that is also a part of the process.
Yes. Modeling can create safety and establish trust. I think that's super important. I do. All right. I feel like we can go in a lot of directions. I think it could be helpful to just wrap up, summarize. I think we've been talking about some things. But if someone's in phase 2, about to go to phase 3, what are recommendations for organizations, leaders in organizations, to get through phase 2 to phase 3 and to have it be solid, not abandon phase 3 as soon as you start a work group and you don't like it.
Mhm.
Yeah.
I would say one recommendation is that hard information doesn't mean you're not doing a good job. And so be willing to hear things that change your perception of reality. You need to go in with an open mind. And yeah, so to be
Mm.
open to that. That's the biggest thing. And I also think turning feedback into actionable change. And for most feedback, there is a real easy way that a statement of participants don't feel a sense of belonging that can be turned into an improvement plan of the next quarter of by the end of the year, we will do X, Y, and Z.
Mhm.
That's where things get lost too. People don't know how to start turning that feedback into bite-sized incremental goals for the next quarter. I think is where people lose the momentum. If you go with open heart and look at feedback as your blueprint of what's next, that is my highest recommendations.
Yes. I like what you're talking about too. It's like the pacing, understanding the pacing that's needed for something, because from a needs assessment, like you said, there's so much work to be done, and the work to be done is likely over the course of years and years. So you're not going to be able to
Mhm.
do all of those things. So understanding that starting point is helpful. And if you don't know the starting point, having the type of support, coaching, mentorship resources to identify what makes sense and to do something that builds upon each other. For me, like when you said that, sometimes leaders might pick the ones that they really want to do, and that might not be the best route to build things upon each other. You might be trying to change something over there when something prior to that has to shift first. So think about pacing, but also thinking about a build upon that strengthens that other thing you want to do out in the distance. That feels so important. And we were already talking about this, but I just want to name it again. And it's the building the internal, like the personal and leadership team capacity to feel things and feel through them, to stay connected to the process and stay connected to each other and stay connected to staff. If you're already in phase 2, like you start building it now. If you're someone who's about to do one or do one again, really think about what your capacity building process is like. It's not separate from, it's part of it. It's part of it. I just believe in that so much. Mm.
Wholeheartedly.
And you had said something too. You were talking about rigor, abandoned rigor. You were saying something about that. Can you speak on that? Because I forgot what it was.
Just to say it frankly, like there is not anything on this earth white supremacy hasn't touched, and that includes research. And our idea of what rigorous research is rooted
Mm.
in who we've studied, who we've modeled it after. One person said that 100 is statistically significant, and surveys are built this way. And there are all these types of ways that the way that we consider rigorous research does not resonate with everyone. And so there are other ways to have rigor. There is rigorous ways to have qualitative data. I think a lot of these other methods that people like to frown upon that highlight people and humans way more than a 10-question survey. And so I think people need to be open to abandon our sense of what rigor is, what gold standard is, to bring in folks who have not been able to have their voices heard.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I just want to say this one thing to what you said, and I can't help but notice that the people who desire to move forward with quantitative stuff in surveys are also the people that need more than a quantitative type of response. And I don't know another way to say it, but it's like a preference to proceed with only opening a small door for staff to share information. And then,
Yeah.
but then also have an individual need as a leader for more than that, more space to
Yes.
share. Because I think an equivalent to offering staff a survey is here's your information, deal with it. And so there's a little bit of that's like incongruent. It's a bit hypocritical. A leader's response to data, to me, only reinforces that this isn't something that's just quantitative. It's very human, story, person oriented. I don't know if that
Yes.
makes sense. It makes sense in my mind.
No, that made 100% sense to me. Like, yeah, you are a leader and you care. You should want to hear
Yeah.
people's experiences. And by narrowing that from the jump, I think is telling. And I'm a qualitative person. I love qualitative, but like they both, quant backs up. You can have stories and the quant will tell us like your organization is 50% this, that backs it up. But there should be an element, especially with dealing with needs assessments
Yeah.
that are talking to experiences that you should want to hear people's voices, even if that's hard. And by narrowing that from the jump, I think is telling to what you want to hear.
Yeah. Yep. Yep. Oh my gosh. I think it's a good place to wrap up here. And Jared, thank you so much for this whole convo. I really enjoyed it. And it really got me thinking about some things and how we might want to approach stuff differently or how we might want to frame it. You've just got me thinking. So thank you. And I'm sure people found this helpful. If people want to get in touch with you, what's the best way to do that?
You can look at medicinal melanin on Instagram.
Snap,
That's where
snap.
I'm at.
Okay, awesome. If you want to get in touch with me, you can visit our website at livingunapologetically.com. On there, you'll see social media handles, email. You can get in touch with us in any particular way. If you liked this episode, please share it with people in your network. Have conversations, like, comment, subscribe. Oh, I forgot to mention this too on the website. You'll have access to my book, Bias Conscious Leadership, a framework for leading with action and accountability. And I think that's it for now. And until next time, bye.